The year is 1600. A remote city known as Prehivo resides within the borders of the nation of Bohemia as its capital. If you were to visit at the time, you would be met with a plethora of occult rituals being performed around its streets. The population would still try to live in accord with the teachings of the old order, trying to appease and gain the favor of the old gods to this day. Cannibalism for Grogoroth, orgies for Sylvian, maiden sacrifices in the forests for Venushka, crucifixions for Almer, and masquerade parties for the god. People would willingly let their city be a playground for these ancient beings, all while gathering around the imposing hollow tower at its heart, bathing in the jellos and never watching the moonlight of hair.
Hi, my name is Shadow, and this is the third and final part of our series making a definite timeline for the events of Fear and Hunger. If somehow you ended up here without watching the previous parts, I'll leave links in the description just for you. I sincerely recommend you check them out before watching this one. In any case, this time we will discuss what happened from the end of the first game right up until the beginning of the second. We actually don't know what's canon in Termina to make a timeline out of it, so that's the best we can do. However, today I won't be introducing the playable characters like I did in part 2, and there's a good reason for that. If I did this video would be like 10 hours long and I don't have enough mental sanity to edit all of that, honestly. And also, my goal with the timeline series is to help everyone get a basic understanding of the story. So in any future video I make or you watch, you won't get lost or be confused.
I get it.
So since I won't be talking about the main characters of Termina today, at least in depth, let's make a deal. If the series goes well, which I hope it does, I may talk about them in the future, making analysis of their characters and other fun stuff. So, with that out of the way, let's continue with the timeline.
The city of Prehivo flourished during the 17th century, but fell from prominence as the Cruel Age progressed. The city is special, very special indeed, for it is where the second game takes place. And not just that, at the top of the Hollow Tower, aka the Moon Tower, there are still traces of the old god Hair, affecting its citizens with his lunacy-inducing light and creating distorted, dreamy landscapes. The faint traces of the dead god Venushka seem to be stronger here, and even after being absorbed by the god of fear and hunger, the god of the depths is still capable of spreading its influence around the dark corners of the city. That is all to say, Prehivo is full with the presence of the old gods. We'll come back to it in a moment, but right now, let's continue with the timeline and see what else we know happened during the Cruel Age. With the advancement of technology, the old rites started to dwindle. Crucifixion, something that was used to worship Almer, became a taboo. The old gods fell into obscurity as they became something associated with the occult rather than being mainstream religion. Unlike the old gods who were forgotten, Almer became the predominant deity. His religion spread to all parts of the world. The dark priests, who once worshipped all the gods, started to favor Almer instead. It was also during that time they probably stopped being persecuted and infiltrated the Vatican. We also know that over time, the influence and worship of the god of fear and hunger started to decrease. Even though she was the primary deity of the Cruel Age, the Vatican is likely responsible for trying to make people forget her. In official religious books, she isn't treated as a true god, like Almer is. The Penance Knights were still very much deployed by the Vatican. It seemed that vampires and witches became a threat to the church, and so they developed the Sabbath, a special sword to be used by the Penance Knights during their hunt. Also, the Yellow Mages started diminishing, and few are left. We know that the remaining practitioners were separated into small groups that would travel the world in search of knowledge about the occult. Fast forward a few centuries that we don't know much of, we arrive at the 20th century. Remember the city of Prehivo? Its brothel was closed. The church, currently run by Father Domek, wanted to gain control over the population. So people without the option to seek comfort in the brothels would have to resort to the church for solace. Father Domek also created the Saint Domek Orphanage. Like everything else in Fear and Hunger, the orphanage also hid dark secrets. A man called Father Hugo also worked in the orphanage, and remember those vampires I mentioned just a while ago? Well, he was one of them. Donovan Hugo was an occultist and a priest. He used the blood of children to prolong his lifetime, as well as performed rituals with it. Not the best person to run an orphanage, if you ask me. I suppose it was also around that time that another deity started gaining influence in Prehivo, the Sulfur God. There are many signs around Prehivo pointing that the church is actually worshipping the god instead of Almer. While the Sulfur God worship is very similar to Almer's, after all, he is part of Almer, there are some key differences. Sulfur worship is way more brutal. People dance around the crucified victims for days straight, celebrating their pain, and heads are offered in blood to send the souls of the victims to agonize in the sulfuric pits, just like the god himself. It seems any kind of immense pain and torture is good in the eyes of the sulfur god. Sorry, I meant I. No discrimination. Both good and bad people suffering eternally, the same way he did. Around this time, the First Great War begins. While we don't know much about it, from what little information we can gather, it is confirmed that Odegaard and the Eastern European country, Voronia, fought it. What is more important than knowing which countries fought this war is knowing who was behind it, and that we do know. The first war was a scheme plotted by the New Gods. Yes, the New Gods that exist within the Hall of the Gods. With time, they became the political leaders of the world, secretly pulling the strings behind the shadows to stay in power. Even after the ascension of the god of fear and hunger, they haven't given up on surpassing the old gods. And if the blood of millions was necessary for this goal, they believed it was small price to pay. In 1919, the First Great War ends. A great debate is held in Prehivo by the mourning sides. You see, Bohemia itself was not a part of the war, but due to its strategic position, it has historically always been caught in the crossfire of the more powerful nations. Being a neutral force in the war was likely the reason the debate was held in its capital. With the end of the war, the Nameless Liberty on the Ground, or NLU, was formed. The group consisted of individuals that partook in civil disobedience all around Europa. They were a decentralized group that does not take sides in war, and works behind the scenes in order to stop the accumulation of power by the dominant countries. In 1922, Legard returns, but this time, he was Kaiser, a political figure surrounded by mystery who brought into being the greatest popular movement Bremen had ever seen. He stayed in secrecy under his famous yellow hood, but that didn't stop the people from being enchanted by his speeches that seemed to unite both lower and higher class. After 14 years, that is, the year of 1936, Kaiser officially became the Chancellor of Bremen by cutting down the opposition, literally. Even though he had the support of the population, the Bremen officials refused to recognize him, until he finally showed them his might as a god, and they had no choice but to concede. When Kaiser became Chancellor, things started to take a dark turn. Maybe in a way of reminiscing the old times, when he was the captain of the mercenary band, Kaiser formed special troops named the Marching Men of the Night's Day that expanded Bremen's borders in an alarming rate. This rapid expansion alarmed the other nations, and while his acts were considered monstrous, people of Bremen waited eagerly to see if the ends would justify the means. Between the time of the First Great War and Kaiser's ascension, the Eastern Sanctuaries merged with Voronia and Bohemia to become the Eastern Union. They started to develop something called Project Logic in the city of Prehivo. Kaiser was one of the masterminds behind the project, but was very interested, in taking it all for himself. To the point he even pitted Bremen against the Eastern Union, leading to the Second Great War in the year of 1937. That was also the same year a woman from Bremen named Rayla joined the NLU forces. Her objective was to infiltrate Project Logic at Prehivo while working for the Bohemian section of the rebellious group. Rayla was a young woman and a prodigy in both computer science and engineering. Because of this, she was invited to participate in a special student exchange program between the Bremen Empire and the Eastern Union. She got hired to work at the top secret facilities of the time, that is, Project Logic itself. The infiltration was a success, but it wouldn't last long. 6 months before Fear and Hunger 2 starts, Rayla was captured by the Bremen Empire and accused of treason. She was freed when NLU helped her escape. Okay, Shadow, we get it. Legard's back and he's doing evil stuff again. But what is that Project Logic you keep talking about? And I'll answer that in just a minute. But we're finally at the year of 1942, the year that Fear Hunger Termina takes place. So the only thing missing now is explaining the plot of the second game. So I'll be doing just that.
My goal here is to make things simple and easy to understand, without taking much of your time. So, I'll make a summary of what is Project Logic in the amount of time showing on the screen right now. Let's see if someone can beat the record. Ready, go! Project Logic is essentially an attempt by the new gods to surpass the old ones without relying on the Throne of Ascension. By that point, they must have realized that it was a trap and decided to take another approach. Probably learning from what happened with the god of fear and hunger, they want to artificially create an ascended god, just like her and Almer. For that, they wanted to reach something called a collective consensus. Now everything makes sense, right? Oh, it doesn't? Okay, I'll explain it a little better. You see, the old gods are manifestations of concepts. They represent feelings and ideas. To dumb it down and make it a lot easier to understand, imagine there was an old god of YouTube. What form do you think that god would take? PewDiePie? Mr. Beast? MadPat? Frapolo94? The correct answer is all of them. When you think about a YouTuber, a few of them come to your mind, but they are separate, different beings. The god of YouTube would be a fusion of every single YouTuber into a single thing. Can you imagine it? I hope not, because I don't think that would be pretty at all. So when you think about creation and destruction or YouTube, it could take many different forms and each individual being has their own version of it. To artificially create a god, we need to unify all different views on something, and then that god would become a thing. And that's exactly what the Eastern Union was trying to achieve here. They wanted to create a machine capable of absorbing and storing information about every human. The machine would then unite all the data into a single entity, reaching a consensus on what is something. We humans would still not be able to imagine it though, but the consensus would still exist within logic. To build logic, the Eastern Union needed a few things. First, they needed a core, someone to become one with the machine and exist as its kernel. That's what Kaiser was trying to become. That is why he started the war in the first place. He wanted to hijack the project and become logic himself. Second, the person in the core of logic needs to be connected to the machine both in consciousness and subconsciousness states. To achieve that, the subject needs to be in a constant lucid dreaming state. That's why Eastern Union chose Prehivo to host experiments. The influence of the traces of hair is capable of creating dream worlds where the subconscious part of the machine can exist, while the real, awake world will have its conscious parts. Third, they needed a cube, one much like the Cube of Depths. Kaiser was probably after it when he sent archaeologists of Bremen after the dungeons of fear and hunger.
Cause it fails, baby! Come on! That's what I'm for!
He isn't in possession of the cube though, and attempts to recreate them by the Eastern Union failed. Until one worked, Vinushka's cube. They managed to absorb the remaining traces of the dead god into a cube, and it was then used as a fuel for Logic's ascension. Remember the green hue from where the old gods came? Logic would be responsible for spawning her own artificial green hue. That way she would be able to replicate the power of the old gods without having to rely on them. In short, Logic is the internet, but on steroids. If you're interested in learning more about Logic, I recommend Max Durot's video on Fear and Hunger 2. I will stick to explaining the lore aspects of Logic, and he delves into the psychological and symbological ones. Myro, the creator of Fear and Hunger, confirmed he was inspired by one of Max's videos when making Logic, so there's some credibility to it. Anyway, let's get back on track. Remember back in the first video when I said Rare antagonized any mortal trying to become a god? That would not be different here. Even as just traces, the moon god started to spread madness all around Prehivo, trying to stop Logic's ascension. These were the festivals of Termina we see. Wait, festivals? There's more than just one? Yes, there were 3 festivals in Prehivo alone. One was held only by the Prehivian citizens. The other happened when the Bremen army invaded the city, and the third happens when the playable characters arrive. Crazy, right? But these also weren't the only festivals of Termina. They seem to happen all around the world. This explains all the crazy things going on in Prehivo by the time we get to play. I mean, almost all of them. So, Logic and Hair are in opposite sides, and the characters got caught up in this whole mess. But there's a third party. Remember when I said that Sulfur God started to gain influence in Prehivo? Yeah, they're also involved. The Sulfur God cultists hijacked the festival for themselves, making all the death and blood spilled to be used to give power for their deity. They used the festival and bloodbath caused by it to increase their numbers. Winners of the festival can join their ranks and become Sulfur cultists, just like Perkele did. So now that we have a clearer picture, let's recapitulate. The Eastern Union and the new gods are trying to create an ascended artificial god. Kaiser wants to hijack it for himself and become the machine god, so he starts the Second Great War trying to conquer Prehivo.
Hare is trying to stop Logic from being complete, so he starts the festivals of Termina, and the Sulfur Cult is using the massacre to make their god more powerful. Quite the mess. Just before the game begins, Kaiser invades Prehevel, ending the Second Great War. The Easter Union destroys the railways that lead to the compound of Logic, but it's only a matter of time before Kaiser gets there. To stop Kaiser, Rayla fuses with the machine god before him. Hera wants to stop us from activating the teleelectroscopes, terminals that need to be on for the ascension to be complete, and Perkele and the Sulfur God wants to recruit the winner of the festival to their ranks. Will the machine god become Lion? Will Sulfur one day return from the sulfuric pits? What happened to the characters? Only time will tell. But for now, this was the plot of Fear Hunger 2 Termina. I hope you enjoyed.
And just like that, we're done. Thank you so much for making it to the end. If you enjoyed what you just watched, please consider subscribing. I'll be releasing more Fear Hunger lore videos in the future, so you don't want to miss it. Also, before this video ends, I want to share a few words first. Huge thanks to everyone from the official Fear Hunger Discord server who helped me with the video. They answered a lot of my questions and taught me stuff I had no idea existed in the game. For a game like Fear Hunger, it's almost an impossible task to make a timeline. There aren't dates for most of the important stuff, and you're forced to make guesses with the clues the game gives you to fill in the gaps. I tried to keep the speculation to a minimum, for this series at least, focusing on what we know for certain first and foremost. But I had to speculate here and there eventually. I made a timeline with two things in mind. It had to correlate with the information we have so far, without contradicting with anything we know by the time I'm making this video. And I also wanted it to be in a way that feels satisfying for the viewer. It can't be just a timeline. It also needs to tell a story. If you disagree with the order of certain events I presented here, feel free to do so. Adding to that, I'll be releasing in the future the document I made when making this timeline, with the references for what I mentioned in the video. If you want to learn more details or make your own version of the timeline, keep an eye for the community tab. I'll be releasing it there. Anyways, that was it for now. Thanks again to everyone. Until next time.